Ask it.
Ask it.
Ask it.
Ask it.
Ask it.
Welcome to the Ask It podcast, a blend of spirituality, philosophy and psychology, which rather than providing answers, considers good questions. Today we talk to psychotherapist Jerry Marzinsky and therapist Sherry Hatfield about the Mace energy method of healing, a revolutionary approach designed to permanently eliminate negative feelings, thoughts and emotions arising from over-identifying with past traumas and emotional disturbances. The key to a person being in charge of their life is not only to effectively manage these disturbances, but to totally eliminate them for good. Sounds too good to be true? Let's see what our guests have to say.
I've not seen anything like it. You know, it's the only thing I've seen that really works. And the results were amazing, especially with trauma. This wasn't invented by any psychiatrist or psychologist. It was invented by a genius mariner. The guy was a merchant marine ship captain. And he's brilliant. He just pieced together all these things that he'd read over his lifetime and came up with a totally different concept of what the mind was.
Can we start by the pair of you just kind of introducing yourselves? So obviously, Jerry, you've been on with me before, but Sherry hasn't. So can we just can you just give a quick background of both of you? So we can. Yeah.
You want to start, Sherry?
Yeah.
Yes, I'll start. Look, a little bit about my background is early in my life, in my early 20s. I had a severe state of depression, an experience of severe state of depression, to the point that I couldn't be with my two children. And in that experience, I did come to that moment in my own inner world of deciding not to be here. And it was only through an experience that I had that the next morning from making my decision, that I woke up and I had a severe sore throat, so bad that I couldn't speak, hardly swallow. And so I took myself to the doctors for a sore throat. And it was in that moment that he had said, look, this is what's happening for you. We've got to get this back in balance for you. Within a couple of months, feeling high acidic feelings and experiencing back with my children and family, there was a moment in my life as I was watching them play, so only little, that I had this, how am I feeling this, to how did I get to that? How did I get to those such low-level feelings and decision? And so I've spent 35 years of my life looking for that answer. And so that took me on a very big path. I had been working in childcare, but I took that in a lot deeper. And they actually became my master teachers. And with everything I'd learned, I let go and I let them teach me. And in a way, it was a remembering. And then, of course, I went into more of the esoteric meditation. And then that, of course, involves self-inquiry. And so I did that for many, many years. I then branched out into more bringing that together within a child, because I did have a lot of understanding of child development, meaning, emotionally, mentally, or cognitively, as I like to say, and, morally, all those elements that come together, how we take things on at certain ages. And, of course, my own self-inquiry. And then 17 years ago, I should say, I had a personal crisis that was quite big to me. And I resigned from all my work, and I said, that's it, I'm done. And that in that passage, by letting everything go, to me was the doorway to what was to come next. My decision was I wanted to know why. Yes, I had had some understanding, lots of understanding, but to have that crisis and to experience everything come to the forefront again was like, I knew I didn't have the answer. And but in that doorway, it opened me to meeting John Avery, which was John Mace's right-hand man, if you like. And it was in that moment that I actually went and had a session with him, and that was it. And I knew in my own personal session, there was a moment that was like very deep inside me, I found it. And this is what I'll be taking forward. And that's how I'm here. I've been doing, so I'm a Mace Energy Method practitioner and trainer, but this is what I take forward in to help answer that question, because that's what people are saying. Why do I keep doing this? How does this keep happening? The very nature they're asking why I'm wanting to come for help is because they know deep down it's not who and what they are, or we wouldn't be looking. So that's a little bit about me.
Thank you.
And my journey.
Great.
Yeah.
Jerry?
Yeah, my name's Jerry Marzinsky, and I've spent virtually my entire career on the front lines of mental health. I started off at Central State Hospital in the state of Georgia, working for psych there. I was there for 7 years. And it's there that I started learning that what I'd been taught in school didn't match reality on the front lines, especially with as far as psychotics or schizophrenics. They were saying it was a chemical brain imbalance that caused schizophrenia, but I never saw them ever give any kind of clinical test, blood work, EKG, EEG, nothing, no kind of test whatsoever to determine what was out of balance in these brains of these patients or by how much. Matter of fact, they didn't even know. There's I don't know, 40 some neurotransmitters in the brain. They don't even know what the chemical balance of the brain should be. It turned out to be a giant sham, produced by the drug companies and the psychiatric mafia. So after Central State Hospital, I went back for a PhD, spent a few years there, hated it, absolutely hated it. Came back and I worked in mental health centers. I got a job in the psych department with the Arizona State Prison, and I worked with the criminally insane for 18 years. After I got out of there, I worked as a private contractor with local hospitals, and the last 10 years of my career I spent working psych crisis in the emergency rooms of the major hospitals all over Tucson. And I was always wondering, what's going wrong with these people? Because psychology was real good at, and psychiatry too, at describing what was wrong with them, but they didn't know what to do about it, and nothing that they were doing was working. The regular kind of therapy that you're taught in college didn't work or didn't work well. And these drugs that the psychiatric mafia is dishing out are toxic. They're poisonous. Virtually everybody who's put on an antipsychotic drug will eventually go off it because they can't stand it. And then they'll go psychotic, and then the whole merry-go-round goes again. So, working for the private psych hospitals, what I saw was these guys would go off their meds, they'd get put back in the hospital, they'd be charged thousands of dollars to their insurance company or to their private funds. They'd be put back on meds, released, and then they'd go off them again, and it would just be a big merry-go-round that just spun round and round and round and round, with each time destroying their brains. These antipsychotic drugs are very toxic. They shrink the patient's brain and they destroy the peripheral nervous system with long-term use. But the psychiatric mafia won't tell them that. They'll put them on Klonopin to mask those symptoms while they continue to poison their brains. So, I was going, what is causing schizophrenia? And they didn't know. They would say it was a chemical brain imbalance. I could see for myself that wasn't it. I saw that 80% of the research articles that psychology puts out couldn't be replicated. So they were no more than BS, so yeah, a small percentage were valid. So it was like, okay, I need to look for myself and see what's going on. The first thing I wanted to know was, what are these voices and what are they telling these people? And lo and behold, I got into trouble with psychiatry for asking these patients about what their voices were and what they were saying. I found that it was the voices that drive paranoid schizophrenia. It's no chemical imbalance. It's no genetic anything. It's these voices, and these voices run separate, repeatable, consistent patterns. And so the psychiatric mafia is saying, well, they're hallucinations. No, anything that runs consistent, repeatable patterns is not a hallucination. So then I went to, okay, what are these patterns and what happens if I disrupt them? And I found that if you disrupt those patterns, the voices get pissed off. They take it personally, and then they start weakening depending on how disrupted the pattern was. But one thing interesting I found was that these voices have complete access to the memory of these people. So they can go in there and they can pull up all the rotten things that they've ever done, and they can rub them in their faces. And so they can pull up stuff that the patient doesn't even remember. Now, that's where Cherie's system came in. When I first, a friend of hers emailed me, and I get a lot of strange emails, believe me. And he just basically said, I got somebody you need to meet. And then he added to that, the worst that could happen is that you'd see a jolly grandma. And I said, well, that doesn't sound too bad. And, I kind of tucked it away and then go, yeah, I think I better follow this one up. Something in me told me I need to follow this up. And then I met Cherie, and I was suspicious like you were, Lucinda, and I was hitting her with all kinds of questions. And what do you do here? And what do you do there? There was enough in the book written by John Mace where I could begin putting this stuff to use, and I could see it working, and I could see it working fast and accurately. But there's some parts they left out that was real frustrating, because I'd hit those and I'd go, well, where do I go here? What do I do there? But there was enough in there to actually see it work. And what's so cool about this system is it takes the spirit of the person into account, and that spirit will guide the therapist to the hidden stuff that's buried that they don't have access to. That is called negative identity. So what happens normally is when you run into a crisis, you have you don't like the feeling, you don't like what happened, it gets buried. It gets buried alive. And the ego buries it and keeps it buried, and then will project it out onto everybody else. And it's triggered by somebody else with those same aspects. So somebody has the same negative traits, they come into your sphere, this negative identity reacts. It doesn't respond, it reacts. So there's a flare up. And then that the ego drives that person away. It's like trying to put two ends of the same magnet together. You put two negative poles together and they repel each other. Well, that's the same thing the negative identity does. So the ego buries this crap, keeps it buried, doesn't want to face it, doesn't want to look at the ugliness of it, keeps it buried. So it keeps getting triggered by other people with those same characteristics. So no matter how many, the more traumas you have, the more of these that are buried. So they're like landmines. You keep hitting a landmine after landmine after landmine after landmine. Now you can do something about the ones you know about. It's the ones you don't know about that cause the problems. And that's where Cherie's system is just majestic, because it uses the spirit to help find the buried stuff and then pull it out and discharge it. And what's so cool about this is it wasn't invented by any psychiatrist or highfalutin, PhD or psychologist. It was pieced together by a person I think is an absolute genius after reading what he wrote. He pieced this together from all the stuff he was reading, philosophy, and he was widely read. He was a Marine, what do you call it, merchant Marine captain. So he would drive these big merchant ships, and he was very good at that. And then got a job as I think it was a tugboat captain or a harbor master in Australia. So he could start working with this stuff. And then he put it out and he goes, this is what I discovered. And what's so interesting about it is that it works, and it works because it looks at the mind in a very different way. It doesn't look at the mind in the way that most people think the mind functions. It looks at the mind as a device that creates an image or a picture of wherever you focus your attention. And the spirit is what takes the place of what most people call the mind. So what he
hold on a minute, Jerry. Say that again. So yeah, say that again.
So what most people consider the mind, at least in England and in English, in the Western world, except for Germany, that doesn't have a word for mind, which is interesting. So the mind in the Mace method is conceptualized as a mental device that creates an image of wherever you focus your attention.
Yeah.
So it creates a mental image, and that's all it does. It doesn't do any of the processing. It doesn't do any of the judging. It doesn't do any of the thinking. That's done by the entity or the spirit, or what John Mace calls the energetic entity. Right? That's the one that does the thinking and the processing and the calculating and all the stuff normally attributed to the mind. So what's cool about this is that John found that once you can put an emotion or a concept into an image, then it can be gotten rid of. It can be dissolved. And once the spirit or the energetic entity leads you to where that stuff is buried, you can pull it up, you can form it into an image, and then that trauma can be dissolved, and it no longer has a charge. That negative identity can be dissolved. It no longer has a charge. It's more a memory than a charge. And yeah, I'll use anything that works. The whole time that I was on the front lines, I would use anything that I saw worked. I didn't care how ridiculous it was. But when I started using this stuff, I read the book, and it was instantaneous. It was just boom, boom, boom. It was quick. It was accurate. It was fast, and there was no bullcrap about it. You didn't have to. And what's even more amazing is the therapist does not have to know anything about what the problem is. Nothing. All they need to know is what the feeling is, and maybe a little bit about the situation. They don't have to tell about, oh, I was raped, or I was, all this stuff people don't want to talk about. All they have to do is let you know the feeling and the intensity of the feeling and what's going on with these images that they're working with. So it's completely private. It's all going on within the head of the patient himself, which is absolutely amazing. Most therapists can't imagine they're not knowing what the person is talking about. You don't have to know. You don't have to know it. They can keep it completely private as long as they're following the instructions and we're getting the feedback that we need. It can be gotten rid of. And it's working with schizophrenics. Nothing else works with them. So I found it works very well with moderate cases or mild cases of schizophrenia. Works pretty well with moderate cases, and it's very difficult with people who are too far gone. They have to be able to understand what you're saying and follow the directions. And I've worked with schizophrenic patients where the voices would interfere and they'd start mocking the person and slamming them around and doing stuff to them, and this stuff still worked. So it's the only therapy that I know that works with schizophrenics. And there is nothing else other than these toxic meds that the psychiatric mafia is pushing along with big pharma. And those don't work. They temporarily numb the person. They don't get rid of the voices. And they're awful meds. They're just awful. They don't cure anything. They cure nothing, absolutely nothing.
Okay, Sherry, what would you like to add or to what Jerry said about the Mace method?
I think you expressed it beautifully and summed it up in its simplicity. Just to edify what he was saying, it's the inherent power and the simple power of your own being. That is the component that keeps being left out, and yet yes. It's where we begin.
Yes, exactly. And it's not to be found in psychiatry or psychology. It's absolutely absent.
Yeah. And sorry, carry on, Sherry.
Well, which is aligned with our awareness. and in meditation, and, psychologists are now, go and meditate or yoga. I mean, the pointer that's in there, they're pointing to, do this as a thing to do. But the very thing they're giving them to do has very deep principles. And of course, it talks, the place it leads you to is the real you, which is not persona, it's awareness or spirit, or as Jerry said, John brought it in as energy being or energy entity. And that was just to take it out of any dogmas, because we can all agree, even science is proving that now, everything is energy.
Yeah. So some people might know that as the witnessing self or the observing self.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. You have to have awareness. You have to be, that's why I say to clients, they go, what's wrong with me, or what is this? And we don't get into that, as Jerry is pointing to. But, you're edifying that person. And I say to them, done nothing wrong. Isn't it interesting? Your language says, I notice I do this, I do that. I said, who's the one that's noticing that? And they just sort of stop and they go, me. I said, well, then you can't be it. It's always there. How do you know you exist? I just do. It's just that awareness. So we'll probably get into that a little bit more, and Jerry will expand on that as well, is that we identify very much to our roles and identities. When we're introducing ourselves or when we ask about someone, it's all very much our stats.
Yeah.
How old, married, single, there's stats. How many children do you have? What do you do for work? And I say to a lot of people, look, we're just going to if you just took all your roles off, just take them all off for a minute. And what's left?
That's like that.
Me?
That's like that Zen meditation where you sit in pairs and your partner just keeps asking you, who are you? Who are you? And you start off with, well, I'm Lucinda, I'm a psychotherapist, blah, blah, I'm a mum, blah, blah, blah. And you go through all of those roles, as you're saying, Sherry. And then you get to the point where, well, who the hell am I? And all sorts. When I first did that meditation years ago, all sorts of emotion came up, anger, crying, all sorts of stuff, because who are you under all of that?
Yeah. And that's what the children really started inside me. Because when you watch children and they go into home corner, they role model their primary caregivers. We'll start there and earlier. So they play mummy or daddy, their primary caregiver. And then as they interact with the world and the different roles that are there, they start to role play that. They would walk into home corner like that, be mummy, daddy, And as soon as they walked out of that invisible line, home corner, they'd come back to themselves. And because our role in a childcare setting is to observe, not analyze, observe, I kept seeing that. It got finer. It's like, what is that? So I came home one night, and because it had so much of my attention, I thought, I'm going to do what they do. So I've come home. I'm getting ready for bed, actually. And I thought, well, I'm finished for the day. I've finished playing. So I'm going to take off my mother role. I'm going to take off my childcare role. And I was just doing that conceptually. And next minute, I had this huge, emotion. But it was this insight emotion. And it was, oh, my God, here I am. I had that experience. I don't need a name. I don't need a role. I spent 27 years to get to that. And here I am. I'm none of my roles. I just am. And, when you read the esoterics of that, I'd be like, where is that I am? You're always there. But it's just the identification.
For me, it was getting out of my body for a short period of time and think that I was still alive and I wasn't thinking, and I was just awareness, a moving awareness. And I'm like, wow, this is who I really am. Beside all the roles, beside the body, beside all the senses that are constantly distracting you, this is who's there. And the Mace method takes
Beautifully
advantage
said.
of that.
It's a bit
Yes.
like it's a bit like the kind of non-dual. I don't know even how to language it beyond that, but it's the kind of non-dual practice. That's not even a practice, but where
I hear where you're coming from.
Yeah.
Yes, you can say it fits many.
Yeah.
It's because, and Jerry, I think, said it beautifully. It's what do we do about it? What we've got all these principles and pointers, and there are beautiful truths in all of them. But it was, I came to the same spot. But yeah, but I'm still doing it. What do I do with that? That's where causism and Mace. That's where it comes in. Here we go.
Yeah, that's where the rubber meets the road.
This is it in action. Yeah, absolutely. This is it in action.
Yes.
And
where the other things are like, and matter of fact, in a lot of cases, it makes people worse. Oh, this happened to me, that happened to it. Just brings it all up, and they're waddling it again for the billionth time, and it doesn't help anything. That's where the beauty of the Mace system comes in. I know this may be hard for some of you guys that aren't therapists to follow through with this, but John Mace wrote a book. What is it? Something over
causism.
Causism.
Energy over mind.
Energy over mind. For you therapists out there, it'll give you the basic principles that you can put to use yourself and see for yourself how this stuff works. And you don't have to be a brain surgeon to be able to do this. Anybody can do it. Of course, it gets more complex and deeper, as Cherie has more than adequately showed me. The further along you get, the deeper it gets, and the more intriguing I find it. But the basic principles can be put to work from the book, and I was using them before I even got into it further with Cherie. I'm going, well, I don't need to use anything. I mean, this works. What do I need more for? But yeah, I found out later. That was the tip of the iceberg, but it does work.
So I suppose what joins us all together, us three, before we even get into this practice, is that we all think that it's absolutely necessary that we talk about the spiritual self of people, because as you said, Jerry, that's just not really in our training, and if it is, it's a kind of cursory just nod to that, and nobody really knows what that even means. And really, that's, in my own little way, I guess that's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to make my colleagues aware that there's this whole dimension, well, that is our essential being, that they're not taking into account.
Well, I hope you have a tough hide.
Oh, well, yeah. I don't. Well, I do now after working with Sherry. So, okay, yes. So I just want to fire off some thoughts and see what you two think of them. So the kind of, over the last few years, it seems to me that we've started to think about trauma differently, and we recognize that trauma can exist in the body as a memory, as a consciousness in the body, if we want to talk about it that way. So Sherry, how does that concept relate to the ridges that you were talking about when I had a session with you? So Jerry, you said, and also you said to me, Sherry, that when something difficult is happening, something challenging is happening, and it generates a strong feeling in us that we find uncomfortable or too painful, or we just don't want to engage in that feeling, we try to push that away or stop that. And I think my understanding of what you said, Sherry, is that it creates some kind of ridge, some energetic ridge. Is that right?
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's what you resist persists. So, if like you're pushing away a glass of water away from you, you're still hanging on to that glass of water while you're pushing it away.
Yeah.
So what happens is the ego buries that stuff so it doesn't have to deal with it, and then forgets about it, but it's still buried alive. But it takes a lot of energy to keep it buried because it keeps wanting to pop up. So that's positive energy that you could be using for something else if you could get in there and release it, which traditional therapies are really poor at doing.
Yeah.
So Sherry, you want to answer? About the body?
Well, we see it as these energy ridges impinge on the body, because these We start with the spirit. And you know, when we're doing a session, we're not talking about all that. We're just getting in, because it's feelings is where we experience it. So we're going to help people deal with unwanted thoughts and feelings. That's where they're aware, because they're aware of the manifestation of it. They feel it, they hear it, and of course it feels non-survival. It doesn't feel good, and that's why they're on the self-help journey. I don't like this feeling. I don't want it. And they're trying to solve the problem. So, but where we're working from, where we're actually working from, is working with their being, their energy, their awareness, who they really are, all those words we're trying to point to.
And you can track
so
these
all these energy ridges, and these
you can
energy
track these
ridges
down.
are stored within.
You can track these down through trauma, you know, because when there's a trauma, that's where these things are buried.
Yes, and we actually create them via upset or trauma. When something comes towards us we do not like the feel of, we are naturally going to use our energy to resist it. It feels a pro-survival act at the time. But of course, as Jerry's saying, it gets buried. We bury it. We didn't like the feeling of it. And we certainly don't come back after the event to try and process it. We're in little bodies. We're not cognitively. That's very different. Awareness is always there. But of course, then what Jerry was communicating was something else comes along and triggers that feeling again. But instead of us being able to handle it, we just do the same thing. I'm going to give it some more energy. There's that feeling. And we resist it. And the more and more you resist it, the more and more energy you're having to use to do so.
Yeah.
That's that positive potential. Jerry's saying if you had energy, back to you. But of course, you don't know it's happening. This is done a little unconsciously, a lot unconsciously. And of course, then over time, we identify with it. And that's why we call it a negative identity. But it's really just...
The more of those that you have buried, the more unstable you become. And schizophrenics have a lot of them that are buried. You know, so it's a process of getting rid of one after the other after the other.
Yeah. So when you say it's a consciousness, what you were sharing there, Lucinda, it's a consciousness. Your energy is an intelligence. Our spirit, it's energy that can store knowledge and experiences. It's an intelligence, not intellect. That's very different. And so what's happening, if we just slow it down, we seem to, because this is the invisible. We can't see it.
Yeah.
You can't see a feeling either. It's very subjective. We can see its effects. Someone might act it, or we feel it on our body as an experience, but it's still all the invisible. It's the abstract there. That is the essence of your consciousness. It is the aliveness. It's whatever you give that energy to gives it life and meaning to you. So what they're calling the trauma that creates a consciousness, no, it's your active intelligence, your energy giving it life. That's why Jerry's saying buried alive. So it's giving these thoughts and feelings life, or keeping them active, keeping them alive, and not real-time feelings and thoughts anymore. So that's why people are saying they are a consciousness, because yes, these identities, because it's filled with negative thoughts, feelings, concepts, and ideas, which become our behaviors. Then we say it's us. This is what I'm doing. It feels very real. You see from it. You see the world from it.
Yeah, despite the fact that you're not your thoughts or your feelings. That's not who you are.
Correct. Yes. And
well, okay. Let me throw in a question, because most, like perennial philosophies that are found in most spiritual teachings and indeed most religions would say that, wouldn't they? That we are spirit, essentially. We are not our thoughts, we are not our feelings. But what I think sometimes gets lost, this is just my understanding, my belief, is that we're human, incarnate for a reason, because for the pure fact that this body does feel, it does experience emotions, and it's only through this body that we can have that sensory experience here on planet Earth. So I suppose if I'm really transparent, that's one of my issues. Maybe I've understood you incorrectly, and so you'll tell me. But it's almost like when you say, Jerry, we're not our thoughts and we're not our feelings, I have a problem with that. I understand that we can over-identify with our narrative from years ago.
Right. Well, look at it. You might look at it like this way. This is like a spacesuit. You're in the spacesuit.
Yeah.
So, or like you get into a car and you start driving the car.
Yeah.
It's the car. You're not the car. The car is your vehicle. Your body is the vehicle. Your eyes are the headlights. This is a physical manifestation, but you are a spiritual being. You're a spiritual entity that drives this vehicle. And
I have no problem with that. I absolutely agree with that. But it's almost as though we're saying, well, our feeling self is redundant, or is a red herring. And yeah.
This is where language, we run into trouble.
Yeah.
So what is a thought? It's words energy in a sentence.
Yeah.
Yes? Where do words come from? It's language. We developed it as human beings. So what Jerry's pointing to is you are not a thought, meaning you are not the words.
Yes.
You are before the thought. It is something that we use. And thought, when we're using it in that context, oh, I had a thought, it's actually a past tense. So you've heard something.
Yes.
I've heard something. Yes. When we're being and using words and language to communicate a very subjective awareness or concept or idea, can't see them either, we're using words and language to do that. But the words and language is not the thing. It's your ideal or the intuit or the understanding of something that you're then trying to bring forward with the words. So you are before the words, you are not the words. Yes. So that's what, when we're saying we are not our thoughts, who's the one that's having them or aware of the thought? So the thought can't be you. Now, there's a difference between feeling, sentient, and then emotion or emotional content, especially negative emotional content. All low self-esteem, negative thoughts and feelings about yourself, compulsive behaviors, depression, anxiety are the effect of a negative identity. That's what creates that.
Yeah.
So you're not the emotional, you're not all the emotional content. You are not your anger. You are aware that you're experiencing this feeling of anger, but you are not the anger. You are before. There has to be something that is experiencing it.
Yes.
So that's what Jerry, and where we're pointing to when we say things quickly like, you are not your thoughts and feelings. It's not to make you invalid. It's to slow this down to who's using that word. I had a very wonderful friend that said to me once, a lot of people are walking around licking the menu of, looking at the menu and the picture of a steak instead of eating it. There's a lot of theorizing going on out there, talking all this stuff, and the word is not the thing. They're not eating the steak.
Yeah.
That's what we're trying to point to.
Yeah, and that's
where
critical.
Mace comes on in.
Yeah, and working with schizophrenics, that's critical, because the voices they are hearing are not who they are. And if they can't make that distinction, they're going to be gone. There's nothing that is going to be able to help them. They have to formulate that distinction between who they are and what these voices are, what these other thoughts are, you know, and that's determined by intent. So, you know, you have to ask, where do thoughts come from?
How does Mace fit, and your new understanding of this, Jerry? How does that fit with your knowledge that you previously came to, that the voices with schizophrenics were negative entities and not?
I still believe that because of the number of experiences I've had with them.
Yeah.
But I think they build up to it with these negative identities. So the more negative identities there are, the more disturbed and upset and unstable the person becomes, until these identities kind of form a personality of their own and take over. You know, that's what they're after. They want to take over the person. And that's what these identities do too. They drive you. They control you. And a lot of times you don't even know it, because they're unconscious. They're buried. But yeah, I still believe the voices are that schizophrenics hear are entities. They're different than the person. They are parasitic, because every time they show up, the person's energy it's drained. They have no energy. And there's a one-to-one correlation between the voices showing up and the amount of energy that person has. It's just sucked out. I have no idea how they do it, but it's consistent. And none of this stuff psychiatry is looking into. All they're looking into is, oh yeah, we'll just drug everybody. We'll turn you into a zombie so you don't feel anything, and then you walk around like a zombie. You know, this stuff actually will get in there and remove these negative identities, and it works for all range of people. I mean, it works for, you know, maybe it doesn't work well with the very chronic regressed schizophrenics, but it works for virtually everything else.
I interviewed a guy called Thomas Sinzer, wonderful guy. He was a hypnotherapist, and in essence he'd kind of come to the same conclusion, that, and it's a bit like the kind of shamanic view actually, that when there's a trauma, that part of you splits off and another identity is created to manage the trauma. And the split off part, or the identity, the original identity, actually does have a whole will and existence of its own. So that's not that far really from what the concept that you're both talking about.
And it protects itself through projection.
Yeah.
You know, so it throws that out on everybody else, so it doesn't have to face it in itself. The ego doesn't. So, you know, it'll throw it on somebody else and then drive that other person away. Yeah. So,
well, in a way, he was going one step further and saying that those identities actually have a will and a being, and are psychic beings in and of themselves.
Yeah, but they don't have any energy in and of themselves. They have to get that from you.
Yeah. Yeah.
And here's where a language comes in again. So yes, these identities. So from our point of view, we resist an unwanted feeling, and of course creates an energy ridge, and stored within that energy ridge is all the effects of the trauma. That's what creates a negative identity. We call that a negative identity, because over time, each time it's being triggered, it's getting your positive potential, giving it life. And so yes, when it's activated, it will act, and you will speak it, act it completely. But that's how fast it is. You're saying it's me.
You react.
So our language again, so from our point of view, and you know, of course he's on it. We're all going to head, if there is one principle and a truth, that we're all going to head there. We're all trying to do that. But of course we're doing a lot with language and what sort of knowledge we've had prior, what wording, and trying to piece that together to communicate it. But here's where I'm going to try and help these entities or these negative identities that we create. Persona, which also means mark, is not a self. It has energy in it, and with anything with energy in it, it is going to act, and it will act as it is. But it's not it's not a life force of its own. It's only got life with our energy and potential. That's what the Mace energy method is doing. We're bringing out your energy out of resistance. That's its purpose, and therefore all that cannot exist.
Yeah.
The energy returns unto you. So some of this language, like it's got a will of its own, it doesn't have a will of its own. It has your energy and potential in it. So it can act. And yes, he's right. You know, John talks about the roles and identities we have, and he gives an example of a man because they're purposeful. We are in a material universe. I'm going to come back to what you spoke earlier. Yes, we're an energy being, and we're having a physical, material experience.
Yeah.
But roles and identities are something we use, languages we use that is pro-survival and purposeful for our pro-survival. So a woman, you know, one of the examples John uses is the only reason you go and get a driving identity is because of its pro-survival to you. And it solves a problem. These are all problem solving for our daily life. But what happens is we start to identify with them as a self instead of us, that is what I'm using it for. So if I lived in Hong Kong, there is no way I would need a driving identity. The public transport system there is amazing. But here in Australia, with the vastness of what we live in, and we don't have that type of public transport, I want to go places. I want to take my children places. I'm going to get a driving identity. I'm going to create one. We also have positive identities. Remember that. We're honing in on some of the negatives, but we have positive roles and identities. What we call negative identities are something we unknowingly create and accidentally create via upset or trauma. Because when something comes towards us we do not like the feel of, we're going to use our energy to resist it. And that's how it gets our energy and potential.
Yeah.
It's a little unconscious. So because we did create it, means we can discreate it. And really all we're doing, the only life it has is your energy and resistance. So your positive potential is trapped with all these negative thoughts and feelings, which will act as what it is, that feeling, this thought, that concept, that idea, I'm not good enough. You'll act it. We bring your energy and potential home unto the source. This doesn't exist. And that's why people, when we finish the session, I say to them, I want you to say that. Can you say you feel that? And they just laugh. No, I can't. So you also have positive roles and identities. You don't see it as you're discreating them or not using them, but you've got many roles or identities that you've played that were positive to you back in your past that you don't use now. And you've probably got a lot that you're creating new. You know, now that the world of podcast has come into our life, we never could, you know, it was only radio show hosts. Now there's a lot of us that can create a podcast radio host identity. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So there, all your positives. But these, and who is enlivening that, who is creating that, who is perfecting that? You. And then you'll come out of your podcast identity, and then you might go and see your daughter or son, you know, if you're a parent, and then you come into this mother role identity. But it's really a purposeful, material, physical thing that we do. How can I point to that? So what makes a mother role? It's really a parenting role. So I like to bring it back to our natural state. Watch mammals. They birth a baby and it's all instinct, and they take care for the survival of that species, for their baby. And they have their mechanisms to do so. We're going to use language and say, that's a mother, that's a female. We're pointing to what we're seeing and understanding. So when we have a baby, you know, the role in our West is called a mother. It just means that you're a parent. You have a young. Then we have all these concepts and ideas of how a mother should be, or we've had experiences with our own parenting. This is where it becomes all conceptual, our experiences and identification. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. So they're purposeful and practical in the material universe or in our daily life. You know, I love playing with, you know, I think I said to you, Lucinda, they're purposeful. I'm having a problem with my health. So, of course, I need to go and find someone that can help me with the problem of my health. And people who want to work with people in helping heal may study, and I want to help heal bodies, and I'm going to study this area so I can help others. And so they will develop a role. So let's say my problem in my health is I have a bad tooth. And there's people that want to help people with their teeth because that can, you know, bad tooth can kill you.
Yeah.
But so they've realized that this is an important thing. I want to study that. I want to do that. So I'm going, I've got a really bad tooth. Who do I need to call? I'm going to call the person who has studied all about teeth and knows how to help me with that. And the role we actually give him is called a dentist. So we're going to ring a dentist. So I know who to call. And as I teach my young, you know, if you ever have bad teeth, I want you to ring a dentist. I want to do something with my hair. And of course, then there's people out there who love playing with hair, learn all about how to color hair. There's a whole, you know, it's 4 years to be a hairdresser. We don't realize how much they learn. And of course, I'm not going to ring a dentist to do my hair. The person we call that does hair and learns all this, knows how to cut hair and style hair and do all sorts of things with, is a hairdresser. So they're purposeful. They're roles, and we play as a society for problem solving of life and living. But we've come a little bit too identified. If you look at the Western world, it's what we put first is social stats. And there are, you know, I'm a doctor, I'm a lawyer, oh, I'm just a cleaner. We've all heard that. No, you're you first. Then there's roles that you play, but there's been given authority to certain roles, which then limits the person. And that's why I respect Jerry and you know, even you, Lucinda. It's that explore. There's you first. Hang on, there's something not right here. It's not just this body of knowledge. And actually, I'm the one that's learning the body of knowledge, and I'm seeing something. And the body of knowledge isn't quite doing it. And then when you start bringing you through to explore, which that's our nature, something's not being answered. The problem is not being solved. Jerry can see this. This is not solving the problem. It's going to keep driving. That's the will. That belongs to you. You'll keep looking. What happens is this becomes then solidified, concrete. This is how it is. And then you're limited. So that's when people start going, well, you know, I either walk away from that, but I'm going to keep going. That's what happened with John Mace. It's what Jerry's doing. It's what I did. It's what you're doing, Lucinda.
It's not what psychiatry and psychology is doing. It's like they teach it, this is the way it is, this is the truth. And what I hated about psychology, there was no way to check out anything they were saying. You don't even have access to a clinical population until you get up to the master's degree, and that's only limited. And then in a PhD, you hardly have any access to a clinical population. And most of the professors that I was dealing with didn't have any real clinical experience. They got it all from books. As this guy said it to this guy, who stole it from this guy, who wrote it from this guy. And it's like these little fish I remember I saw when scuba diving. They were in these little holes at the bottom of the ocean, and one would leave to go get a rock, and then another one would come and steal one of his rocks from his little hole. And they were stealing rocks from each other. The only ones who were bringing in fresh material to the community were the ones who would venture outside of that little community and get the rocks from outside and bring them in. That reminds me of psychiatry and psychology. They're just stealing rocks from one another. This guy wrote this, and you put all these references down, and it's like, but you ask them, well, what do you do about it? And they go, oh, well, we don't really know. I mean, you just talk about it and drug them silly. Nothing works. It doesn't work.
Yeah.
So, Sherry, what's your view?
And we've got to be careful. I use a lot. On
Jerry's experience of external negative entities attaching to people.
Early in my piece, I have a respect for it. And that's why I say to Jerry things like, I have said on it, I'm not saying there is or there isn't, because that's not what I'm pointing to. I want to point to the power of you first. It's what I'm trying to point to is that you do have the power. And it ties in with all this very much, role psychologists and psychiatrists know you better than anybody. No one knows you better than anybody than you.
Yeah.
And if before psychology and psychiatry, we have to use a little bit of history. What did we have before? Who gave them the authority that they had the authority?
Yeah, good question.
Before that, we had religion. If we sort of go back in history, there were shamans. If we go into different areas, there were, doctors, but religion, it was the priests that told you where you were at, who you were, and what you were doing. I sometimes look at psychiatry and psychology, if we're not careful, I'm not saying all, there are some good explorers and discoverers there, who they are as people first, not their role, are starting to do the same thing. They need to be very careful. So in light of your question with Jerry, we're big energy beings. We just happen to have ours playing out with the body. Entities, if you want to start, there's astral levels of consciousness. You've got the Buddhic, Atmic, we could go into all that. But when you drop your body, everything is stored within your energy universe. Just experiences. And that's why when you can come and have another body, they can be activated, if you like. These are energy ridges. That's why people can experience past life. They're not actually having a past life because they're in this body, but they're accessing experiences in their energy universe where they had a body maybe in a past life.
Like Mozart.
What we would call a past life. Yes. Because all that knowledge and everything you've ever experienced is stored within your energy being. So you don't lose that. That also comes into other conversations. So when you drop your body, if there's an identification on that level, which is negative, and they're entities, we'll call that entities outside of you, that's negative energy. And it will act, it's got source energy in it. And it's just playing out on that level of consciousness because that's where it can only be. This type of energy can't access high echelons of life. Just like when you and I, in our physical experience, when we were down in those feelings, it was all real. I had people around me that resonated the same, like Jerry's saying, like attracts, you're just in it. And that's life, and that's how it is. And of course, then something happens, you have an experience, and you start oh, hang on a minute. To me, that's the real you, activating that. And so you start raising your vibration, you start learning, you start seeing things from a different perspective, and you have these high echelon different feelings. Life starts flowing very differently. Can you see where I'm pointing? We've had that physically as an experience. And then we're meeting people that's so trapped here, they can't get out. We're trying to come in and say, you know, it's okay, you don't have to live like that. And they're going, you're nuts. Don't be ridiculous. Life is bullshit. If it's one principle, it's exactly the same for what we can't see, you know, entities, Wakido, all this, you know, you can call it the collective unconscious. There's so many pointers, but I want to just point, if I point to a principle, because I'm not negating anything. Yes, there can be negative energy. We can even feel it in a house.
Yeah.
People that have lived there prior, and there's been a lot of negativity. We walk in the house and go, oh, I don't like the feeling of that. We're energetic beings, transmitters, receivers. We're going to feel it.
Yeah.
So these energies, entities, are that is a stuck level of energy. And yes, whether you've got a body or not, we can connect. Because if you're vibrating at that rate, this is vibrating at that rate, you identify with it. No different than if you're at, we speak in therapy and all that type of thing. If you're a negative person, you attract negative people and you're just around negative people. So yes, there can be attachments, or really it's identification too. And that's why when we've come together, Jerry and I, and how life did that, you know, nothing, I don't see it as separate. It's like, okay, what is this? I've had experiences with the esoteric and the astral. Absolutely. And there used to be a lot of fear around that. But the one principle back then was it can only connect to you if you're vibrating at the same rate. That's homeopathy, they're natural laws. So, and Jerry pointed that out very beautifully in the beginning of this conversation, whereas we create the energy ridge and then we start to see people that mirror that. Or if someone has those same qualities and traits, anger, it's going to activate yours.
Yes.
And then you're going to experience. So then if you discreate yours and this person's doing that, you're like, so it's exactly the same law for the entities. And that's where Jerry is seeing that principle. And so he's expanding into another level. We just focus on discreating it here. That energy cannot feed on your energy to keep active.
So, Sherry,
what can't feed off that. Does that make sense?
It does.
That makes sense.
What happens in the here and now for you, being this aware, knowing that you are an energetic being, but what happens for you in your interactions with other individuals if something happens that triggers a feeling in you?
I ring a Mace practitioner.
Sorry?
I ring a Mace practitioner.
And she does. She said,
so look, there's a difference between, so there's a difference between something's, you know, so that, see, I have so many questions of clients that come in, like, will I be doing this forever? Well, no. We're just creating these big ridges. So someone may say something to me. If I don't have a big ridge around it, or an identity, remember they're activating the identities that we've unknowingly created way back when.
Yeah.
So I have more awareness, and it's like made me feel that, but I'm no longer identifying, if you like, with the feelings. It's like, oh, what's that sensation? I certainly don't name it as quick either. It's like, well, what is that? So I've got more space, if you like. If it's a trigger where I'm going, oh my God, how is that better? La, 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 la. Oh, how dare they? Rah, 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 rah. And I'm still going an hour later, I ring a Mace practitioner. And because it's something that's been activated, I didn't know that person's activated. And now I'm becoming aware And because I'm hearing it go on, I have the space, especially now, if you're talking to me now, I have the space to go, oh, hang on a minute. And if there's a bit of, I can look at it. See, it makes it difficult because, again, we're trying to point to something where I've had the experience, Jerry's had the experience, you've had the experience. If you watch children, I'm going to try and point on life where we've all seen it. Children experience the feeling and then it's done.
Yes.
So before language, so we're going to come before words again. They experience it, express it, there's nothing around it, and then it's done. And it's to communicate something. Hungry, scared, hurt, they've fallen over and they just cry. But they put no story on it or words. And if you listen to all the words and stories you actually have, it's come from your parents. You just fell over. This is what would be in the now, no words, being, it is what it is. Fell over, impact to the knee. I'm still having to give it language, but it hurt. And we come and go, oh, that really hurt. That was the language.
Yeah.
I'll go and fix this for you. You're okay. All that. So there's language to comfort, but this is where you start to learn, and you'll see the child as they develop that go, I just hurt my knee. That's not what they're feeling. We don't know. Can you hear where I'm pointing?
Yes.
Well,
Yes.
animals do the same thing. You look at a lion chasing a gazelle, and the thing's running for its life. It's almost gets caught. I mean, if it gets away, then it stops at a safe distance, looks around, and goes back about its business. It doesn't sit there and remunerate over and over and over, go, oh, that goddamn lion, it almost got me, that son of a bitch. Not like humans. I mean, they go, oh, that bastard, I'm going to get his ass. It's over.
Yeah. Yes. So the important part of all of that is we're not saying that it's not, we don't feel the feelings, but it's almost like feelings are waves, and instead of resisting it, the wave comes in and it's felt and then it goes out again. It's only in the resistance that these issues are created.
Yeah, and it's the reaction.
Yes.
It's a response versus a reaction. Once you get rid of that emotional load, then you don't react anymore. It's more a response. It's a more logical response instead of a reaction like, oh, no, you dirty, no good. That's a reaction. And that's when you have something buried in there that needs to be dealt with. When you're reacting. And you're reacting to somebody who has the same kind of traits in them that you don't like about yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so, yes. And so response is I can have a feeling I don't like what you're saying. Maybe you're saying something really terrible, but I'm not having this emotional overload. Identity's gone. I could just say, please don't speak to me like that. I don't like it. I still have my own presence, my own power, and I can still watch the sunset, and this it's a sensation. It's very beautiful. And we want to name it and express it, and there's some beautiful positives to that, there's beautiful positives. But those words will never be the feeling. I'm just trying to communicate something to you, and I think poets and all that are beautiful. So it's a beautiful sensation, and so now I just enjoy it. Before I'd be naming it. I'm probably taking myself out of it half the time. Oh, how beautiful. And look at the sunset. And I've had many spiritual journeys and experiences. Oh, isn't this wonderful? And rah, rah. And the feeling would be gone.
Yeah.
And I remember doing a meditation and I got, because you keep naming it. You to think your attention moves elsewhere. Just be in the experience.
Yes. Yeah, I really understand that. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's what we're doing. That's why if a client says, I don't know the feeling, or they give a word, we don't stay at the word. They know the sensation. They know what it means to them. We don't even analyze what words they're giving us. It's what it means to them, but it's the sensation that they know. I've had a lot of clients that will say, I don't know what I would name the feeling. Good, I don't need to name. You know the feeling though, don't you? And they go, yes. Because we don't analyze anything. We don't get the client to analyze anything. You can't analyze a feeling. Edward de Bono, he was right. And that's where we're getting a little bit
crosswise.
A lot of truth and pointing, but we're getting a bit lost.
Yeah. I guess I'm asking questions for myself, but I'm also thinking, well, okay, what are the people watching this? What are they going to want to know and ask and maybe have difficulty with?
Yeah, I think that go on.
No, please go on.
What I've noticed for most people, what they're wanting to understand is they are aware. The very nature that they're listening to even your podcast, and people are searching and listening to, in Jerry's platform, is they are trying to solve a problem. Deep down, they know. What is the problem? They have a negative thought or feeling or a behavior that's getting in their way. They don't like the feel of it. And therefore, deep down, they know there's more that is possible for them. I suppose what we're really communicating is life is always evolving. And this piece of natural laws has come together, put together by John Mace. And he was never identified as for the person. He said, don't worry about John Mace, just get it out there to the people. So what I'm going to get him, only using it to acknowledge, is that here's a piece that's come that you do not have to live with them. It is not a self. It feels like it, but it's not you. And we can help you discreate all the effects of those negative thoughts and feelings. Not integrate, not manage, not analyze, discreate. The only thing that mucks up a computer in its own natural system is a virus. So we can liken these little energy ridges, negative identity, to a virus. It's mucking up your natural system. And so a lot of clients are aware. They've done all the therapy, the theorizing, and yes, it opens up doors and perception. Lots of great things. But they're still going and still looking because that feeling is still there, or it acts out somewhere else. They're aware. So this is the piece in their journey that in the experience, they can discreate it. They don't have to live with it, analyze it. There's a lot of people say, but if you don't have your negatives, you've got to have negatives to know the positives. Come back to your non-dual. There's only that. You do not have to live with negative thoughts and feelings that are repeating. And they are aware that it's repeating. That's why they're looking. That's why they're still seeking. And that's what, so Jerry is walking with people who've had extreme trauma. Yeah. Extreme trauma. That's the manifestation. And he's gone in there to work with them, and he started to explore what is happening for them. But he was still looking for the key. He's seeing patterns. He's seeing, from where life was shining his point of view. We've all got a point of view where we're looking. So, of course, and it brought him towards Mace. Here's a piece that's going to help you with what you have seen. So it's the same for everyone. No matter what doorway they're coming from, and especially if they're coming to your podcast, Lucinda, and listening and wanting to learn, and to Jerry, is because there's a piece.
So how many practitioners are there of Mace? Are they all?
So, yes, we've got, it's been a big journey in its own. There's lots of practitioners out there. We on our main website, I think there's about 25. There are heaps of practitioners that were trained way before. So John started 20-something years ago. I've been doing it for 17. And I know I've trained about 50. So they go off into, doing what they're doing, but there's a collective of us that are coming together now to move it forward as a collective. And John Mace passed 4 years ago now. And, so there's been a different sort of movement that we're coming forward. But there's a lot of inquiries, and I'm training all the time, and it's one of those grassroots movements. I think even you picked that up, Jerry. John created it for the people, and it's the people that have moved this forward. We are where we're at because of clients, or everyday people coming and coming across it. And what I find is that it's got its own movement, and how people come towards Mace, how they find it, are the most delightful stories, myself included. And so it's almost like it's having its own movement. And I have to say, Jerry, in you sharing, and especially working with people who are dealing with these type of manifestations, they're big beings underneath, as all of us, and they're just having a bit of a hard time trying to handle the trauma that they've lived with in their life, is that it's getting more and more attention because you're out there talking about it. And so I've had inquiries from other therapists, everyday people, because we're people first. We're all looking, because we're still noticing there's something there. That's wisdom. I think that's marvelous. And so looking for the piece.
I've had a handful of clients that did real well with this, and they go, well, I want to learn this, so I ship them your way, like, yeah, I want to be able to do this after experiencing it.
Do you have people, Sherry, that you've not been able to help?
And there's the nature of our being. Yes, probably 3 in 17 years.
Wow.
The very first principle, the very first, what we say to all clients is the only thing that'll stop this. Well, let me rephrase it this way. The only thing to help this to work for you is that you want to change something.
Yeah.
If you don't want to change anything, then there's no point. And what we mean is, because it's the simple power of you. I'm not here as a therapist in the conventional sense. I'm a guide. I had the experience and I went, wow. And so I wanted to train so I could guide others so they could discreate what they're not too. And so that's what we're trained in. There are the principles, very much natural laws, how you're made up. There are some premise shifts, but through the training, you are going to discreate a lot of negative identities that you don't even know there. The very nature of the material, the very nature of life and living, and because your attention's on it, that's what it does. It's very experiential. You end up discreating these energy ridges, and so there's more and more of you that comes forward, and more of your life changes and the flows, and it's wonderful. It's life-changing. And by the time you're certified as a practitioner, you don't have any triggers in the sense of that you're at the effect. A client might be dealing with something quite severe. I have done counseling prior in my life as a counselor. You hear a story and it's like, oh, I feel that, but you got to put it to one side. All the techniques you're taught as a counselor. But you see from a very different point of view when you're coming from the real you. And so I have had clients say certain things, they have shared it. It's like, it's okay, because I know deep down it's not them. It's not a self. I don't tell them that. It's like, I can help you with that. So if you just follow these simple steps, as Jerry was saying, we explain so you feel safe in what we're doing. It's just naturally how you're made up, and follow these simple steps. And I'm a guide more to help it's almost like I'm a bit of a John Mace. I'll point this way. John Mace wanted to know why it couldn't be a self-help. We've had a lot of clients that will go out there and try it on themselves. I was a self-inquirer. I came home and tried it myself as well. And because that's the nature of who we are, and I respect that. And of course, I was a little cockeyed when I went back to my training, and I said to John, I feel a little bit cockeyed today. And he said, oh, you went home and tried it on yourself, didn't you? And I went, I did. He said, good, close your eyes. But I got the answer to what that is. So when you've got a problem, so he was exploring what that was, and life always mirrors. And his computer got a virus. And of course, he could be fixed from within the computer or whatever his little system was, Norton antivirus, we'll call it. And he rang a computer guy, and he had to clip his computer in, plug his computer into John's computer. And he was doing something. He said, why are you attaching your computer to mine? He said, I'm going to get my computer to get your Norton antivirus to see that there's a virus there, and then it'll do it. And there was John's answer.
Yeah.
So that's what I'm just here to help. We help point. I don't want to say too much so we don't trigger things. To point to it, you locate it because you know the feeling, the unwanted feeling. And then we use the therapy or the principles of the mind, which Jerry talked to you a little bit earlier. It will create an image and picture of what those feelings and sensations represent to you, but we don't analyze the image. It gives you something to look at. And then there's the natural discretion process begins. So our role is to help keep you separate from that as that happens naturally, to keep it simple. I mean, the rest you can read John's book, and it is all written in there. Absolutely.
So Jerry,
that's really...
With the kind of people that you work with, there must be layers and layers. There's so much for these people because they're so tormented and have had such difficult lives and lots of trauma.
That's the ones I work with.
Yeah,
exactly right. It's one thing after another thing after another thing, but usually it's the big stuff that we handle first, because that's the first thing that they want to. That's what their spirit wants to go for. So it goes after the big one, and then once they feel the relief from that, then we go after all the other ones down the line. But it's their energy being that chooses. I don't choose. They pick, and we go after those ones. And yeah, I've had several who their voices are gone, completely gone. One gal was she had 2 or 3 voices, and she wants to become a Mace practitioner. They're gone. She went on to be a trapeze artist. So she's swinging from, jumping through the air and grabbing this trapeze on the other side and swinging to, to the other, going from being a schizophrenic, hearing voices and tormented, to being a trapeze artist. So what's amazing about this stuff is it works. Unlike all this other stuff, it actually works, and it works fast, and it's fairly accurate.
So how can people find a Mace practitioner then if they want to try it for themselves?
So they can go to the international website, www.maceenergymethod.com, and there is a directory there, and they can click on that. And we have practitioners in the UK, US. Most of us are in Australia because it's in Australia. John Mace was Australian. And there is one in Canada. But they just go to the directory, and we're there. All our sessions can be done on Zoom, or, when I first started, we could do phone sessions or in person. Then in came Skype, and now I have people say, "What?" So we've got lots of ways of connecting. It doesn't have to be in person. I do a lot of overseas. So yeah. So and just go there and visit and feel drawn to one.
If I wanted to train, or somebody else wanted to train as a Mace practitioner, would you go? Does it have details on the website for if you wanted to do that training?
It does. Or you can go directly to the Causism Institute, the body of knowledge John coined as causism. So you can go to causisminstitute.com, and that is more for the training in the Mace Energy Method practitioner.
Okay, great.
But each website links to the other.
Yeah, good. Thank you.
Yeah.
And
Jerry,
I have a lot of information on schizophrenia on my website too, at jerrymarzinsky.com. For there's stuff there for people who are struggling with the voices that we provide free.
Great. So any
Yeah.
last words from you, Jerry? Anything else that you'd like to let people
Me?
know?
Well,
Yeah.
I'd say it's the voices that drive paranoid schizophrenia. It's not any chemical imbalance. It's nothing genetic. It's nothing, it's the voices. It's a spiritual battle. And this Mace stuff works great for, light to moderate schizophrenia. And it doesn't work so great with the more regressed ones. But that's better than anything else out there as far as I'm concerned.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah.
Any last words from you, Sherry?
I suppose just trust in the simple power of you and people listening, not doing anything wrong. Trying to find the solution. But the problem is not them. The problem is these energy. Grateful that Jerry stumbled upon it and is taking it to people. John always said that the research had been done. It's simplicity in its data, but where it can go to help people is what he always said, we will get to see, he will not. And, I am getting to see it through Jerry. John would be very tough, Jerry, because patience is heartwarming. Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, both of you, for giving so much of your time. I'm really, really grateful. Thank you. That's brilliant. Excellent.
Yeah, and thank you, Lucinda, for giving us the opportunity to communicate and share that there is this possibility.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, definitely.
Hi everyone, if you like asking questions like me, please like and subscribe. Thank you.